big set of news that we have this week is E3. So the ESA, which apparently the board of the ESA hasn't been fully across the statements from the group that organizes E3, which is a bit confusing. But they are moving forward with E3 2021, not in a live event as a face-to-face event as some places are still trying to do in 2021. I believe PAX is still trying to do a face-to-face event, which is interesting.
Insane. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, you'd never see that in Australia, I don't think, even though we don't really have a huge problem with coronavirus generally. I mean, you guys are in lockdown at the moment, but the pitch in terms of E3 2021 is that it will be a 3-day live stream event. They're, again, asking for 2-hour keynotes, award shows, previews, potentially demos, things of that nature, and then really working out a way to get, the audience participating in it. The sort of curveball there is, as sort of, disclosed by some publishers, that the ESA is still requesting, quote, 6-figure sum for publishers to participate. Last year, the 2020 version was cancelled. They were trying to stick with the face-to-face version of it almost up to the last minute. And we had other companies already pull out of it. So Sony, EA, Activision, and other companies just deciding to do their own separate events. And then even with the last edition in 2019 of E3, Nintendo didn't do a keynote, and they hadn't for a few years. And just the final
this
thing.
spell the death of E3?
Well, that's the question, and I guess to segue, Geoff Keighly, who has been running a few events last year, initiated the Summer Games Fest, which is offensive to people in the Southern Hemisphere. It's the Winter Games Fest.
Winter Games,
Jeff?
Thanks, Jeff.
Forget about 1 billion people, Jeff. So he's often worked with E3 to present the main show, and he'd pulled out last year and then now has pulled out formally for E3. And I think it's a bit of the writing on the wall there. They didn't pivot to a digital event. I think he's very much trying to do that. And then I guess the question is, Swinny, how viable is E3 going forward, and even in this year?
Well, even before the pandemic, E3 was really struggling. So they had that leak of all
that was terrible.
The data that was like all the game. So many people across games media had to actually. Like, some people changed addresses. Most people had to change their phone numbers because it all got leaked. And it was just like an open Excel form or like some kind of, spreadsheet form.
Yeah.
Directly accessible via the website. It was such an amateur job. And
just I don't want to move off that point just for a second. Like, especially, unfortunately, there is a very, very small element in gaming of like creepy people. And especially for female journalists, they were like getting calls out of the blue.
That's
like,
up.
I just remember Alana Pierce. So she's a pretty well-known journalist. And now
Australian.
Aussie. Now with Sony, actually, and in Santa Monica, that studio. But she was getting calls and it was like, hey, Alana, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, who are you? I don't even know who you are. And she had to get rid of her number from like 15 years. She'd had that
That
number.
is annoying as hell.
Like, that would drive me insane. I'd be basically like, I'll never deal with this company again.
I would sue them.
Some people try to, I think.
So that was obviously a huge thing at the time. And then when it led up to last year's, before anyone had even heard of or really, it was a blip on the radar, the pandemic. Then, we had Sony pull out, as you mentioned, all them. And even up to last minute, so then they made this big announcement about working with an event partner called IM8-Bit to completely, reinvent the show and the experience and the activations and all the marketing bullcrap, and then they pulled out. And that was before that the physical event had been cancelled. And then obviously then the pandemic came into full flow. So it was already really struggling. Look, at least they're not trying to do an in-person event. That would be completely stupid for them to try to do that. Who knows? I've listened to a lot of people talk about this, and is it worth it for these companies anymore? A lot of them, especially the big platform holders, are doing their own digital events, and so they don't really need the exposure that E3 used to give them. I still love E3. Period. I think as gamers, we love hearing about the big keynotes, conferences, and the announcements. But a lot of that stuff is happening now. It's just they may not need E3 to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately, as someone who's into gamers, I think largely are relatively antisocial, but not antisocial per se, but they're not really the kind of people that necessarily need to go to big events and stuff like that. But there's a place for that. It's fun. It's cool to go to these things in person. And actually have these kind of events where you can meet up with other people in real life and do these things.
Well,
And
I'll
to me,
just say
that's
it's
the biggest
important.
thing it adds.
I'll say it's important to clarify that E3 never used to be that. They only opened it up to the public a few years ago.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
thought
just
it was
like
more
on
than
that.
No,
that-
so it was always just for press, but it was
yeah, it was a
pretty
trade
easy.
show. It was a trade
Yeah,
show.
it was pretty easy to
Well, then,
get hold of
okay,
a press
whatever.
pass. But
Find something else then.
But it wasn't. It
Go to
wasn't meant to be a
PAX.
press event. I mean, you go back to first principles. What is it? It's meant to be a trade show. So it's meant to be publishers, platform holders, everyone getting together and negotiating deals. Hey, I'm a publisher. I need more games. What are the games out there? That's how it's always structured. And then they eventually let press in to cover and promote and create media and marketing buzz for magazines. And the funny thing is, like in Australia, we'd often see this stuff months after it happened. E3 was always like June, July. We're hearing about it in October in Australia, which is quite funny. And I think just from a first principles perspective, it made a lot of sense. Like you need to have that back in the 90s and early 2000s. Now we're in such a different era where, you can reach out to publishers directly as an individual and get press just from, people who are hyped about your game. The world has changed so much. This online version to me makes no sense. And that, like, Sony had already pulled out, so Sony are not going to go back in. That makes no sense. And Nintendo basically had notionally pretty much pulled out of E3. It was really like purely like a bit of a marketing play for them, not really to promote much of their new stuff. They hadn't done that since maybe when Zelda was announced back in 2016, right?
They went pretty strong on the show floor stuff, but not and
But
that's
from a
not an
marketing
option.
point of view, it wasn't.
Yeah,
like,
but that's not an option anymore. So
Yeah.
the value to them is non-existent.
Yeah. So and then you're just left with Microsoft, and the only thing that I can think is, E3 has a traditional lane into mainstream media more than any other thing in gaming, I would say.
I will still say also Bethesda and Ubisoft are also like I'm talking the big keynote conferences and stuff. So it's essentially those three are probably the big three that.
Yeah,
still
but
doing
Bethesda's
E3.
going to be a part of Microsoft by the time this happens.
Yeah,
And,
that's of course. Yeah, that's
like it'd
true.
be bizarre if they had a Bethesda show and a Microsoft show. I find that really weird if they did that. Yeah, so what are you left with? Just like Ubisoft and Microsoft? It's just kind of pointless. And also, by the way, Ubisoft has their forward events that seem to be working fine for them. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The only angle is, again, that mainstream press seem to pick up on E3 just because it's a thing in the calendar. They have the existing relationships. That might be the one angle you look at. And then that then makes you go, well, Microsoft needs the most amount of press out of the big three. So maybe that's why they do work with E3 to do something. But I think it's going to be a very, very hollow version of it. And it was already hollowing out. Personally,
That's the
I'd
thing.
prefer just like having the news happen when it happens. Like, I don't know why we have to try to set like 3 days. where all the news
Pump
comes
everything.
in.
All the pressure that comes in on developers. On really the only good thing it is that it's a way to get publicity for your particular thing. So if you're a smaller developer or a smaller company or something, it's a way to get something in there and advertise, and then more. It's got a broader reach.
I do
That's
think
potentially
there
the
is.
only.
Sorry, go.
No, that's the one thing. The only quick thing I was also going to say is if there's one thing I actually really miss, and that's the game trailers website. You guys remember that GT? That to me it was always my favorite because it had, I don't know why, maybe it's just the way I read information and stuff. It almost had like the least bull approach. I remember going there and it was just easy to see the trailers and see what stuff was at different events and that. And that got shut down, and it just made you realize that, wow, even big sites, and that was a pretty big site. A lot of us used to go into that. Even big things like that can just disappear. So it's nothing's, I'm not saying don't take it for granted, but just because E3 was massive doesn't mean it's going to be the thing anymore. It might not even exist in a couple of years.
Just to go back to your point about, the only thing there is an important part that a lot of people don't think about with E3, and you were mentioning it about from a trade show standpoint, that a lot of business deals and a lot of publishing deals happen at E3. And when you lose that and you lose GDC as well, happening in person, suddenly we're not going to, like, this has an impact that no one will ever know because a lot of those business deals don't happen. Or
they happen behind closed doors.
No, but the point is that a lot of these happen because someone met someone, not so much at random, but like, okay, they met them at a bar, and then suddenly they're like, "Hey, come to our thing tomorrow and present to us and things." And so you're going to lose a lot of that. And look, that was never going to happen in the pandemic era anyway. But I think that a lot of people don't think of that angle of why E3 is actually important to the industry.
You're telling me what we should be doing is spinning off a virtual bar where people can hang out and pitch ideas and stuff.
Yeah, it's called Animal Crossing.
I actually don't get the joke, Mike.
It's not a joke. It's a business idea.
No, there's an app called House Party. Oh, no, not House Party. I'm so old.
Clubhouse. No.
Clubhouse. I'm on it. I can invite you if you want.
No.
You can create like rooms and stuff like that. I'll probably dox myself by showing my screen.
I'll stay well away from Clubhouse.
Actually, it does have my initials.
I'm good. It sounds a bit weird.
I've got to like censor it. I've got to censor it. People can work out what my initials of my real name is.
Oh yeah, they'll totally work that out. Dude, it's gonna happen inevitably. I told you.
All right, just to conclude, like, do we think E3 is going to go ahead or not in 2021?
No.
No, not in person.
I think
no. As in, I don't think the digital stuff will happen.
I love.
You reckon a digital won't happen either? Okay.
No. Yeah. We know in person's not happening.
I know. Are you listening at all?
No, we've established. Are you listening? That I'm not listening. I've said multiple times. I do not listen. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Yes, I think it might still. They might pull a rabbit out of a hat and go ahead with it.
I think it'll go ahead, and I think it will be really embarrassing. I think it would just be like the fact that they couldn't pivot and gear up for an online event last year, when I think everyone would have been on board with them doing it to establish something. I think it just shows that they lacked a lot of confidence to get the online stuff working, and that's really not easy. Like, I do some similar stuff like that at work. And man, there's a lot of technical issues when you're having even hundreds of people watching something, a video feed. Then when you amplify that to millions, like that's the Game Awards. They get millions of people watching simultaneously now. And I don't feel like they'll run it through like a YouTube or Twitch. They'll want to run it through their own thing. And that's
just
really
gonna
not
have to
easy
bite
to
the
do.
bullet and do that. No, it's not easy.
So I think they'll do it. I think it'll have very few people participate. I think Microsoft will. I think Nintendo will only notionally. They won't do a keynote. And I think it will fail. I think like the stream will go down and it'll be a bit of a meme. And I honestly think it'll be like the last nail in the coffin for E3.
I look forward to the Rockstar Energy Drink keynote conference because everyone else has pulled out.
Awesome. All right, let's get on to the next story.